much for the opportunity today. Can I start with a question? Is how many people here have taken on any form of social investment? Great. So, oh, yes. Okay, well. So generally, quite a blank canvas. Fantastic. Well, I'll start with answering my own question then, and I guess that's quite an important one, is what do we mean by social investment? Does it put us all on the same page, if you like? And social investment is, we define it as, it's a loan, it's an investment in an organization with the expectation of getting the money back, more often than not with interest as well. So it's a loan, if you like, and is the way that, well, is what social investment is. It's nothing more technical than that, to be perfectly honest. I think a key difference in terms of social investment, particularly when, from our point of view, is the way that we go about making those loans and the support that we provide to organizations, possibly also the kinds of products that are available. And it's been interesting looking at some of the questions up on the board over there, kind of people looking for the mix of social investment or mix of funding. And generally social investment will be a part of a cocktail of funds, if you like. So if maybe somebody's got some grant funding, they may have a traditional loan from the bank, if you like, and they may come to us for a little bit of social investment. So that's just a very quick starting point about social investment. For us, the way it works, and people say, well, who are you, and how does it actually work in terms of social investment Scotland as an intermediary, if you like? This is a very simple slide. We get money in from a variety of sources. These could be banks, private businesses, government, wherever that may come from, and then we provide loans to third sector organisations in Scotland. Third sector organisations there, we talk about social enterprise, community groups, pretty much most organisations that have got some sort of an asset lock and cannot distribute dividends, if you like, to individuals. What people generally realize that, what people don't realize is we often then have to provide the money back to the people who invest in us. So it goes a full circle, if you like. And the difference between the money that the rate that we loan it out and the money that we have to pay back is how we survive as a social enterprise ourselves. Okay, so that's the general model. Why are we set up? What are we actually trying to achieve? This is probably a bit small for everybody out there. It's about creating an impact in the communities that people are working in. So whether that's health and well-being, physical health, environment, financial inclusion, housing, whatever it may be, that's why we're set up. How do we support organizations to grow and develop through taking on some form of finance? Okay. How we do it is three words pretty much spring to mind in that, and that we use all the time. And it's simple, fast, and flexible. What we do, and I should say that we are what we're called a Community Development Finance Institution, commonly known as a CDFI. And it's an organization that is set up where there's a gap in the funding, if you like, in any sort of finance. So for us, we provide funding where often the banks aren't able to or won't provide finance to third sector organizations. So we fulfill that particular gap. And we do it as simply as we possibly can. So what we understand and what we know is that there are so many organizations out there where the idea of taking on investment is frightening. Organizations are very used to taking on grants, writing big grant applications, getting the money in from that means, and then kind of fulfilling the objectives from there. Taking on investment is very much about a cultural change. What we do is support organizations through that change as much as we possibly can. What we do say is social investment isn't right for everybody. We're not here, and I'm certainly not here today to say it's definitely right for your organization. Come and get a loan from us. Everything's going to be fine. It's not right for every organization, but it's certainly worth exploring. We run a number of investment readiness workshops, and what we found, what we start off by saying on those is that, you know, for many organizations, taking on investment, or when they look to the future and they're looking at how they can fulfill their objectives, they're not looking at the complete picture. They're looking at one type of funding. What we try to say to them is look at both. So a key output from our objectives, 2 successful outcomes, if you like, would be an organization that says, yes, absolutely, social investment is right for me, and another one that might walk away and say, do you know what, I now know that it's not right for me. So those are both kind of successful outcomes of those. In terms of our simplicity, what we say is that pick up the phone and give us a call. We are more than happy to speak to people who've got ideas in their heads about what they'd like to achieve. We have no application forms, and it was interesting reading one of the comments up there about, you know, long application forms. We don't believe in application forms. To quote my CEO at an event last week, well, he is CEO, we will never have application forms. At which point the audience cheered, so I thought that was a nice touch on that one, actually. Yeah, you see a nice hint there, wasn't it? Yay! Thank you. Thank you. So no application forms. What we say, it's about a conversation, it's about a journey from an idea right through to is it okay, how is it going to stack up, and then working through that. The flexibility is crucial, and we've got the success of Social Investment Scotland. We've got our bad debts over the last 13 years since we were set up, sit at just under 5%. And I think that there's 2 reasons for that. One, absolutely in terms of our flexibility and our customer relations, if you like, is that I've got Alistair Johnson here, who's with me today, who will answer any of the technical questions that you guys have, because I'm not in the investment team, so please throw them at him. But they work very closely with organizations. They go out and visit the organizations. They would go and visit you at your site. And they support organizations to get through any sort of questions that they've got in terms of finances, business plannings, or anything like that. That absolutely helps that relationship. The flexibility helps in terms of being able to offer payment holidays. Now with the new fund that we launched a couple of weeks ago, we are able to offer what we call patient capital, and I'll go into that in a second, where maybe there's no repayments for the first few years. But that flexibility in relationships is absolutely one reason for the low bad debts that we've got. Interestingly, I think the second and probably the bigger reason, and sorry AJ for saying this, is actually the types of organizations that we fund. For the most part, will do everything they can to pay back the loan. And that's been quite remarkable to see, actually, is just how much the organizations that we fund, the lengths that they will go to keep the business going, to keep making a social impact. And that's quite inspiring for us. In terms of fast, the other word there, from inquiry to money in the bank in as little as 2 weeks, from anything from 2 weeks. Obviously, that's not from an initial conversation if nobody's got anything written down. It'll take a bit longer than that. But if we've got a business plan, it looks like 2 things that we look at is, one, what is the social impact that you are going to make as a result of taking on the money? And the second thing is, are you able to pay it back? Those are kind of 2 key things. And then from there, working through that, looking at the different organizations. The specific products that we have, we generally will fund anything. Is probably the caveat to catch all of this, if you like. And you can see there's a great all-purpose loan there, which says it all really. As long as organisations are based in Scotland, as I said, or form part of the third sector. But the different kinds of loans that we have, which may be of interest, and again, looking on the board there, I noticed there's a few questions about that. With things like a bridging loan. So a bridging loan, particularly with some of the EU projects, where organisations get paid after the event. So they may have cash flow challenges in actually getting the project and running the project before they get the money in. So we would pay there, as you can see there, from £10,000 up to 250k, and that's got a 7% interest fee. What I would say as well about that, and you can see it later on, is that all the interest rates are fixed for the period of the loan, and that period of loan can be anything up to 13 years. The all-purpose loan, it really is a catch-all, to be perfectly honest, and you can see there's a few examples up there. Buying property, obviously quite crucial to some of you in this room. There, the loans vary between 7 and 9%. The reason for that variation generally is about security. A question we often get therefore is, do you only provide loans if there is security? The answer to that is no. We will also provide unsecured loans, but we would generally provide a discount to organisations that have got some sort of security that they're able to offer. And then the risk capital. The risk capital is fresh off the press. It's a brand new kind of loan that we're looking at, and that's come from research in the market. And that's looking at how do we stimulate growth further, replication, growth of social enterprises. And the idea there was quite a large loan, so from 100,000 to anything up to £1 million, where, as I said earlier on, it's what we call patient capital, where there's a period of 1, 2, 3, maybe even 4 or 5 years where there's no repayments made, which enables the organisation to get itself up and running, to get on its feet, to get the project undergoing, whatever it may be, and then the repayments kick in, say, from years 4 to 13 or whatever the case may be. So again, it's providing real flexibility to the organisation. Got a few other programs there that we run, which I'm not going to go through in any detail, but we are around later on if anybody wants to have a chat. And I guess the key with social investment as well, and I've said it before, is it's about sharing. One thing about the sector is people aren't shy to share. People love to share. It's more about collaboration and competition as much, for so many people. So what we'll do, and what I think the sector does really well, is if, for example, there is an organisation that's struggling to get their head around taking on investment rather than taking on grant finance, is we will actually go out, we'll speak to them, we'll speak to the trustees if needs be, but people expect us to say that investment is good. So what else we'll do is we'll actually set people up with, say, customers of ours to go in and speak to other trustees of other companies, so that they're hearing it from peers within the sector, if you like. And I think that's really important. We've lent about £43 million to about 200 organisations. So we've got a really good database of organisations out there who can lend support if needs be. And I guess the main thing overall, just to finish on really, is that I'm very aware of the time, is it's about sharing. It's about the conversation, if you like. And what I would say is, as daunting as it may appear, it's worth the conversation. And if there was one thing I would say to you today is, let's start the conversation. Give us a call. We can have a conversation about it. If it's not right for you, that will become clear very early on, and then there's one less thing you have to worry about, if you like. If it is right for you, fantastic. If there's other forms of finance that we can bring into the table or signpost you to, which could be grant finance, we work with a lot of grant funders, then we'll gladly do that as well. So I guess, as I said, just pick up the phone and have a chat. Thank you.
Hi, well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Duncan Sloan, and my current role is the head of community banking for Royal Bank of Scotland, and that's a role that I've been doing now for almost 11 years. So, but I feel as if I'm probably wearing 4 hats as I stand before you. So I guess most of my time in the bank, behind that 11 years, has been in what I would broadly call mainstream banking. So very much dealing across all sorts of sectors in what you would hopefully remember as a more traditional bank manager role. So lots of experience in that. The last 11 years has been focused entirely on community organisations, social enterprises, community trusts, organisations that are very much at the heart of the kind of projects that you are all involved with in one shape or form or another. And that's been a really interesting time, both me personally and for the bank, as we look to become more involved in understanding what that sense of community regeneration and this passion that an increasing number of people have in organisations that have been formed to do something with community assets, to do something with redundant assets. And inevitably finance clearly is a part of that project at some stage or form or another. So a very interesting time. We've been involved with some of the organisations that have led that increase in focus over those last 11, 12 plus years. Worked very closely with not only Social Investment Scotland, but people like Social Enterprise UK and some of the other organisations. If I then put another hat on, I also for the last 11 years have been involved with the Development Trust Association in Scotland, sitting as a board member there, And that's given me a really interesting opportunity to see many different projects on a one-to-one basis in the context of the challenges that they have, both in terms of finance, in terms of governance, in terms of business planning, all the key things that I think anybody would need to be looking at, and certainly from a funder's point of view, whether you're a grant maker or a trust or a bank, are really important parts of what you need to put together in terms of your plan. So, Development Trust Association, very growing organisation, very involved in this increasing focus on things like community asset transfer. Some of you will, I'm sure, have heard of the Community Ownership Support Service, which DTAS runs. And if you haven't, I would very much recommend that you have a look at the DTAS website and look at the kind of advice and support, because typically many of the projects that you'll be involved with would merit that interest and engagement and support from the team at cost. And the last of the four hats that I mentioned is for the last 4 or 5 years I've been involved with the Churches Conservation Trust down in London. And that has also given me a really great opportunity to see some of the fantastic projects that they're working with. I've been particularly involved with a project in Bolton at All Souls Church, which has been a fascinating project to take essentially a redundant church, a very large church in a community which is now largely populated by Asians, and how they are turning that into a really vibrant community asset, and very much driven around a social enterprise. A number of different enterprises being built into the programme, but again, all about the business planning, all about the challenges of how you raise finance, the different ways that they can work with the local authorities, but a tremendously successful project which is now gone live on site. So lots of great learning from both my perspective, from a funding perspective, and we're very happy to share some of that with you. One of the things that we do as a part of my community banking team is we have our own microfinance fund. We've had that in operation since 1999. In many ways it's not different from what Andrew has just talked about in terms of the work of Social Investment Scotland. It is essentially a CDFI. It is essentially providing finance to organisations, charities and social enterprises who will have been declined through the mainstream banking source. Now that doesn't need to be with RBS, it could be with any banks, and indeed we've had plenty of clients come to us who are not necessarily banking with RBS. We created this charity, it's a separately registered charity, which I'll show you in a minute, really as a means of providing some alternative sources of finance, bearing in mind that access to finance will generally be the biggest hurdle for many organisations to overcome. And we felt that there was a way that we could provide some alternative sources, provided that there was still a good business plan, provided that there was a robust cash flow, that there was a good project in place, and that ultimately that money could be repaid. So I'm just going to run through a bit of the background in terms of the Microfinance Fund, how we've set that up, and look at some of the clients that we've dealt with. One of them actually is on that front page. I don't know whether any of you recognise that particular building, but that's the Highlanders Museum near Inverness at Fort George. And they came to us looking for, Andrew mentioned bridging finance, which can often be a really irritating part of the project when funding is in place, but you can't actually get the funding put in the right time. And that was an organisation that came to us looking for help in that sense. So that was, we were very pleased to go and help that. I'll talk a wee bit more about it. So the Microfinance Fund, in terms of the bank of RBS, fits in as part of a wider programme which we've been running for the last couple of years, Inspiring Enterprise. And we felt that there was a need to put a particular focus around 3 specific areas: women in business, youth enterprise, and from my perspective, social enterprise. And that's been a really good platform for me to continue to build on the work that we've been doing over these recent years. Microfinance Fund, as I said, was set up in 1999. It's an independent charity. It works throughout the whole of the UK and Northern Ireland, and we've got clients at the length and breadth of the country. And as it says, it supports social enterprises, community interest companies, cooperatives and entrepreneurs who would necessarily or traditionally find it difficult to get access from mainstream finance. Now that might be because of a lack of security, it might be because it might not entirely meet some of the credit policy parameters, which certainly have been a bit more robust, to say the least, in the last 4 or 5 years, given the kind of journey that the mainstream banks have been on. But that's not to say that there is not inherently a good business plan there. May or may not have some security. We will take security if we think it is appropriate. It's not the case in every circumstances. But largely, if they are available to get finance through mainstream, we will tend to not look at it. We won't look at those whose project has been unable to get that. So it's all about access to appropriate finance, viable charities, organisations, and it's the kind of thing that we've done across not just heritable projects, not just trading businesses, but a whole range of different things. So that's just some very kind of headline statistics. Over the last 12 months, 48% of social enterprises sought to raise external finance. Gives you a sense of what's happening with the sector. But most struggle to access mainstream lending. This is all based on a report that we produced at the beginning of last year with the Community Development Finance Association. They themselves are the main intermediary body in the UK for all of the CDFIs, and they ran a report which did a research on what the kind of headline statistics were around community finance in the UK. Community finance, provision of affordable financial services to organisations and individuals unable to access through mainstream lending. And our own Microfinance Fund is really there to help bridge that gap between that demand and supply for community finance. But that little bubble at the bottom there really gives you some perspective of what that demand is. That report last year was suggesting that across the traditional sectors of all of the CDFI lending, that would typically be SME business lending, personal lending, those projects related to affordable housing and social enterprise, that there was around about 6 billion of demand, of which lending figures across all of the sector, banks and CDFIs, was considerably short of that. So, lots of work to be done, lots of opportunities, and certainly no shortage of organisations who are interested in addressing what that demand should be. Back to the Microfinance Fund. So, we generated capital of around 5 million a couple of years ago. Almost all of that has been exhausted, lent out to about 30 social organisations. In fact, the majority of them have been in Scotland when we look at the client base. Just a highlight down at the bottom right there, that eligible social organisations must have a clear social objective. They must be reinvesting for profits for a social purpose, located in trading in the UK, and investment ready in terms of management, governance and financial position. Now, nothing really should come as a big surprise to you in terms of the last three, and I think that any of the projects that you would be talking about and coming to, I think any lender would want to see what the management is, what the governance is all about, and what your financial robustness is. And by that I mean what the business plan looks like, whether it stands up, what the sort of market research that you've done, what the projections look like. And I know that over the years I've looked at loads and loads of projections. And you can look at them with a degree of questioning and assumptions, but it certainly provides a discipline in the context of you trying to look ahead to say, will that work? How sensible does these figures look like? And build in some assumptions, because you would certainly get that sort of feedback and pushback from any lender who would say, well, what if this happens? What if that doesn't happen? And nowadays these financial projections can be relatively easy to prepare, can be relatively easy to adjust in terms of programs. So very important management, governance and financial position. But these just try to give you a couple of examples of the kind of organisations that we've been supporting. Catering to Order is a London-based social enterprise, very much operating in the supply of catering services. It's run as a social enterprise, mainly involving the employment of people with some form of disability. Founded by John Charles, who himself went blind. A very successful business, a business that pleasingly we've been able to procure from in terms of their provision of catering for the banks, events and things that we hold down in London. But very much a traditional business competing against, as you can imagine, much bigger organisations in that sector in London. The London Rebuilding Society, specialising in the creation of innovative forms of finance, very much about affordable housing, working with local authorities, helping people to part own some of the properties and get out of some form of deprived social housing. Mentioned the Highlanders Museum, so we were able to provide them with facilities to, I guess, really put the last piece of the jigsaw in place in terms of what was a very major project for them to refurbish and really refresh the whole Highlanders Museum and start to compete with the other visitor tourist attractions, as well as preserve what has been a long-standing and very passionate project for those connected with the regiment over the years. And the one at the bottom, again, an organisation based in Renfrew who are providing counselling services to a whole range of different clients. And again, relatively modest in terms of their turnover, but that kind of access to finance, very difficult for that organisation to maintain or access through my mainstream colleagues. Whereas in this circumstance, we've been able to put in both term loan facilities and working capital facilities. Another couple that I haven't mentioned there that would be of interest to you, we've been working with the Argyll Mausoleum in Duncan, another, again, heritage project which we've been very pleased to help them support with the final piece in jigsaw in terms of their bridging finance. We have also last year worked with Community Trust in Sandhaven, and that was all about preserving the harbour walls in and around the harbour there. Again, helping to provide working capital and a final piece of jigsaw in the bridging programme, waiting on European money coming in. So some interesting projects there. I thought it might be interesting in terms of how we do it. We resource this all from internally from within the bank, both a mix of full-time resource into the charity to do it. We also mix it up with volunteers, people who are happy to give of their skills and expertise, who might be working in different other aspects and areas of the bank. And that's all about a commitment on our part to give people the opportunity to volunteer and do other things over and above their day job. We're at a very interesting point with the Microfinance Fund at the moment. We expect to be in a position to substantially increase the capital that's available to us by the end of June, and that will allow us to both increase the number of clients that we've got, but also look at offering a different range of products, more flexible loans, again, as Andrew talked about, facilities that might have capital repayment holidays, some form of more generous interest charges associated with it, and also look at how we might expand the capital by looking at other partnerships. There's a number of other trusts and foundations who are interested in working with the fund at the moment, and that would allow us to help expand both our potential pipeline and client dealing, as well as put some more money into the fund. So hopefully that's given you a bit of a quick run through what we're doing at the bank, and again, in due course, we're very happy to answer questions with all those 4 different hats on.
Thank you. Parry, and I'm here from the Prince's Regeneration Trust. As Brianna just explained, I'm actually on the secondment from RBS as well, but I've been with the Trust now for 9 months working on a really exciting project to launch the Trust's own first social investment fund that hopefully will be a new source of capital for projects such as yourselves. I will come on to the fund in more detail, but I just wanted to share with you first some of the journey that we ourselves as a charity have been on as we've been learning about social investment. And particularly not necessarily the financial side, but the idea of the social side. It's a whole new language to a lot of us here about really explaining the social benefit of what you do. And I just want to share some of the lessons that we've learned in this process. So I'm not going to go into what is social investment. Hopefully people are all familiar with that now. But I did just want to highlight some of the benefits and risks. So obviously the most obvious risk is this is a repayable form of finance, and therefore you have to be confident that you can pay this money back. I just want to say that I think there are real positives with social investment as well, in that it is extremely flexible as well. So a lot of existing grant funders out there might provide specific amounts for specific activities. So you might be able to apply to Heritage Lottery Fund for active visitor activities, or to English Heritage to preserve and save a particular architectural feature. But obviously, A, you have to find match investment for all of that, and B, no one is funding sort of the general cost of doing your project. And so actually, social investment is all about, rather than funding specific costs and activities, about funding broader social aims of a project. And therefore, our real experience is that they are very much more flexible, and you've heard that from some of the people we've had here today, that you can apply for both funding and for capital costs, and that you can typically spend the money on whatever you need it to be it staff, be it construction works itself, be it specific activities. So please really do think about this as another piece of financing where appropriate. If you find that with all your other grants you can't pull the whole jigsaw together, this is a really great way of doing that. And then the other thing is that obviously any social investment organisation, as you heard, will quite understandably want to crawl all over your business plan and make sure they're happy with it. And that might sound like a little bit of a torturous process, but it really isn't, and it can be a really positive process as well, because as you've heard, a lot of these social investment organisations are full of very experienced people who they themselves, in setting themselves up, know that they need to work with the organisations they're funding to really understand their business plans. And they can come up with some great ideas and advice. They might look at a whole host of projects. So they are, even if you don't end up proceeding with them, going through the process of business planning with them can actually be really advantageous in of itself. And then obviously the final thing is the whole point of social investment is that you actually enable capital to be recycled. So hopefully if you can include an element of social investment in your project so that you're not completely reliant on grant funding, that's then a bit of capital that can go back for the next project and the next project. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about social impact and how you might communicate and measure this, because this is a critical thing that any social investor is going to look at. And normally social investors, in fact, part of the reason of the growth in this market is that companies and individuals who are lucky enough to be very wealthy are taking some of their money that they could put elsewhere and generate wonderful profits with, and they're saying, no, I'm going to put it in a different arena, a social arena where that money might not give me quite so much financial profit, but is actually doing something good. So they need to know you're really doing something good with that money, because why should they give up their financial return otherwise? So you really need to think about how you're going to communicate and then evidence that you have hit that milestone. So PRT has been through its own journey on this process, so happy to share that with you. But I just wanted to run through a few steps that we've taken in deciding our own social impact strategy for our fund. The first one is to have a really clear vision or mission for what your project is trying to achieve. It's always helpful to say, set out in one sentence, what are you actually trying to accomplish and for who? So for your heritage regeneration project, it might be that you have a building that you know is just not doing something, and it's not just about bringing that building back into use, but it's about creating jobs or creating a space where people from the local community can come together. So spell out, what is it you want to do? Do you want to create more social interaction in your area? And also, it's really important to link it to who that's going to be for. That really helps social investors understand Joe Bloggs on the street who's actually going to benefit from your project. Makes your story that much more compelling. And the other thing, the next step then, is theory of change. So theory of change is sort of a jargon word that comes up in social investment a lot. But all that is really simple, there's all sorts of different ways of measuring and explaining social impact. But I find this to be a really great model, and I'll go into more detail, that actually can really apply to heritage regeneration projects where there aren't numbers and figures that you can count as readily, by setting out a theory of change, which is a logical step-by-step model as to how, if I do X, I hopefully get Y social benefit, is just much more clearer. And also, it helps you then decide how you are going to measure and prove to your investors that you achieved the social impact that you came up with. It can be really, really hard to say, I had a vision that I was going to increase social interaction in my local area by reusing this building. But if you can show a logical step as to how the activities you're going to undertake get you there, you might not have to measure the end results itself. You can just measure the intervening steps, and by logic, the end result will be there. So it's another really useful tool. And then obviously the final step at the start that you need to be clear on is deciding what information you're going to capture to evidence your social impact. Because a couple of things here, you can't measure everything, so you need to think really clearly about that. But also, there will be a cost associated with this, and you need to make sure you factored that cost in when you've been doing your overall budget. So, apologies if you can't see us with the white writing. We will be emailing slides around after this event, so don't worry about that. So theory of change is essentially inputs to activities, to outputs, to outcomes, to impact. If I just run through each of these in turn, so inputs, those are all the things you need at the start to be able to undertake your project. So have you got the right members of staff or right people in your community group? Have you got a great building that you can actually get hold of and get ownership of? And do you have the money, obviously, is another resource that you absolutely need. So list out everything you need so that that's clear at the outset. The next step is, what are you going to do then once you've got all those resources together? What are all the activities and actions you're going to undertake? So there's obvious things like business planning at the outset. There's obviously a construction program here as well. What about any training you're going to run, any education you're going to run? List out all of the things you're going to do so that the person you're coming to for investment understands that, because that leads on later. Because then what you can do is show the outputs of all those activities. And the outputs are the immediate things you can, the easiest way to think about those are things you can actually count. How many people attended my education events? How many volunteers were involved in my project? What square footage of building did I actually rejuvenate? So those are things typically you can count. Now a lot of evaluation and measurement then stops there and says, I've done my job. The whole point about social impact investors is they want to see much, much more than that. So you need to carry on the journey with them. So then you move on to outcomes. And those are, so what are the immediate changes that happen as a result of those outputs? So if we, a good way of using an example of one of this might be if you want to create a new visitor centre in your building. So obviously you need your resources to do that. Your activity is you actually plan your project and build your visitor centre. Your outputs are then from how many people attend. Your outcomes are then what was the change that resulted immediately from those people attending. So it might be that they learnt more about the history about the building, learnt more about the history of their area, that they had increased social interaction with other people who came to the event. So those are the immediate outcomes. And then bringing it on finally to the long-term impact. Well, as a result of that, people then had a better understanding of where they came from and the area they've grown up in. They might feel more connected and more proud of the area, and therefore you might be able to argue that there is actually better community cohesion to some extent, but certainly a better sense of pride and identity in the local area coming for this. So it's all about showing how one thing leads to another, measuring along the way, so that you can bring together this whole story about the true social impact that your project's generating, and that is key to social investors. Just lastly, wanted to touch on a couple of ways of measuring some of this. So some good examples of ways in which heritage regeneration projects can really deliver social impact is obviously they can increase employment, especially if there are new businesses going into those buildings. Obviously increase participation in arts and culture. And obviously there is conservation of resources here. You are reusing redundant buildings. So some potential indicators, the information you need to capture to make sure you can show that you've achieved that social impact. Some of these are perhaps more in the outputs column here. You know, number of people attending events is obviously an output of a project, but growth in local business networks might be a longer term outcome and impact, not just counting how many jobs did I create or how many businesses came in, but then what happened as a result of that, how did they all connect and network, and how did business generally grow in the area. And one thing I do just want to say is, Big Society Capital are a huge player in this market. That's actually the organisation where the government had a brilliant idea that all of the money that is sitting in bank accounts that people have forgotten about and they're not touching, that's called dormant bank accounts, actually adds up to an awful lot of money in the UK. And so what the government has done is said that obviously that's not their money to spend, but how about in the meantime, while it's just sitting there, we do something really good with it. So they created a new law that Big Society Capital can go and invest that money. So they've actually at the moment got £600 million that they've been given that they can go out and invest. Now they won't invest directly into community groups because it would take them far too long to spend £600 million. So they are investing in people, hopefully like us, PRT, and then we can then distribute that money out. But it does have to be repaid because obviously it is people's bank account money. But they've come up with what's called an outcomes matrix, and the link is on this slide. And that is sort of their how-to guide or list of all of the social outcomes that they see out there. And it's a great list to run down with your project and think, how many of these can I hit with my project to show the absolute maximum social impact that I'm coming. And they've also then, you can click on the links and go through, and they've got indicators for each of them. So again, just another really useful tool for thinking about it. So lastly, the PRT, Community Impact Fund. So it's long been an ambition of PRT that not only can it provide community groups with obviously invaluable support and expertise, but actually that we can then provide some funding alongside this as well. Obviously there are lots of fantastic grants and trusts and foundations out there, but that always takes quite a long time to unlock and unpick and pull all that money together. So the ambition of this fund is that if you work with us, help us understand your business plan, we'll be the first mover advantage. So we'll be the ones saying, yeah, we're in, our money's in, so that when you go to Heritage Watch or whoever else, you can say to them, I've already got my match funding, I've already got somebody who's crawled all over my business plan and is happy with it. Hopefully it will speed up the conversation much more. So the mission of the fund is to boost the long-term capacity, confidence and well-being of deprived communities across the UK through adaptively reusing at-risk, locally important buildings. A bit of a mouthful, but very deliberate. The idea here is any locally important building comes to us. It doesn't need to be listed, it just needs to be important for some reason. Hopefully we're expanding the remit of the fund in this way. So is it prominent, right in the middle of the town, and an absolute eyesore, and a really great, if you unlocked that, drive great social impact? Or is it just people are really attached to it, and actually if you can save it and do something great with it, that will really inspire the local community? Whatever reason, that's something that we'll look at. And then you just have to really clearly show how you're going to, through that building, improve the capacity, confidence and well-being of the local people. And that could be through a whole host of things like running construction apprenticeships or creating a space for disjointed communities to come together, or education for local children. Whatever it is, show us how you're going to use this building that's going to help the local people. So, wonderful idea, working very hard on this for the last 12 months. Big Society Capital, as I mentioned, we're in extensive discussions with them to hopefully contribute. We actually ourselves obtained a £200,000 grant from the big lottery fund in March this year that we are busy spending, getting together all the final details of the fund, things like legal issues, making sure state aid issues are fine, regulatory issues, how we're going to staff it, making sure we're absolutely ready to go. And so as part of this process, we've got another few months to go in our development process. We'd just like to invite groups such as yourselves to come to us now, find out about the fund, talk to us, let's talk through the idea, because we want to make sure that it's right for you. So we're absolutely welcoming feedback at this stage to make sure that it works for everybody. So thank you very much.
I'm really interested in what Charlotte said towards the end about the potential fund. I was wondering, do you have any idea about what it will be able to fund? For example, if our project, which is in Dumfries, I think would probably qualify in terms of what it would do in the local community and for the local community. But the aspect of it we might want to fund may not be the bit that seems to be hitting those buttons. For example, it might be for the retail side or the cafe, which is equally important to make the whole thing stack up. So, how would that work?
Excellent question. I think that comes back to my point earlier about the flexibility of social investment. If in order to unlock your project, you need somebody to help pay for that more commercial element, we will look at the broader objectives and aims of the whole project in deciding whether or not it qualifies for the fund. Because the whole point is, if you didn't have that commercial piece holding the whole building together and keeping it viable going forwards, you wouldn't be able to do all of the other great stuff. And in fact, probably, social investment being repayable finance probably links best with these sorts of commercial activities that you're introducing to your projects. The idea is, as long as the project overall contributes to socially, that's what we're interested in.
Other questions?
I'm interested, there's a kind of beauty parade being done here about all you people who are just desperate to give us money. And the Social Investment Fund, I'm particularly interested because I went to your talk out of the blue last week. You're very clear about your rates.
Yeah.
Charities and building preservation trusts can go to the Architectural Heritage Fund for cash flow loans at very good and competitive rates. Bank of Scotland and PRT didn't mention what your interest rates were.
Well, our interest rate typically would be between 6 and 8. Yep.
Our interest rates are probably going to work a little bit differently. So obviously the fund is still in development, so this is all subject to change, but what we want to do is provide more equity style patient capital. So if you can go to somebody and get a loan, and that's fantastic. We want to provide perhaps that higher risk piece there that maybe you can't give us security for, or maybe you need to give Heritage Lottery somebody else security over your building, and therefore you can't get a loan on a fixed interest rate. We'll provide that risky bit of capital. So then what that in turn means is we want to make sure that we share the journey with you. So what essentially we're looking at is saying, right, well, how successful is your project? Depending on the success of your project, the income you drive from it in the future, we'll take a share of that rather than a fixed interest rate up front.
What level of share would you be looking at?
It will depend, it will completely depend on every different project. Because obviously some are more commercial than others, so in some instances we might need to take quite a lot of the income going forwards, but if it helps, to give a comparable rate, if you did the numbers and worked it out, it would probably work out to about 8% in terms of an interest rate on a loan. But the idea is we won't charge you 8% up front. We will aim to get that back on average from all of our investments, but we won't fix an interest rate that you have to keep paying along the way. We want to wait until the end and see, let's share in the success of the project.
Until the interest is repaid, do you hold any percentage of the asset?
So we would expect, the building will be owned by the community group. So we will just be providing finance to that community group. We will obviously want to make sure I think the idea is that we will want to sit side by side with you on these projects, but we're not expecting to own any part of the building.
So we would probably expect to have somebody on your board from PRT. I think we had a question.
Yeah, question for Michelle. You talk about deprived communities.
Yeah.
Talking social, economic, rural deprivation. Do you have any ideas?
So we will have an initial screening that we apply, which is looking at the index of multiple deprivation, which covers all of those aspects. And the idea is, how far low down on that list does your location sit? But over that, we're going to. So the other thing as well, if you sit in what's designated as an EU assisted area, we would also, I'm sure, you almost automatically fall in, because those are locations the EU has already earmarked for saying they need more investment. But it's about a common sense approach, essentially. So it might be that a building is in a location that doesn't fall very low on that area, on that list, but adjacent to it is a really deprived community who will immensely use and benefit that building. We want to apply a common sense approach. We will need to come and look at every building that comes to us.
We have another question from.
I don't know. Okay.
Yeah, that's fine. Go ahead.
Follow up to the previous question, as I would ask you as well, actually. If we want to go down that route of getting funding for a specific aspect of the project, that wasn't necessarily a community aspect, but as you say, makes a difference as to whether the whole thing is sustainable or not. If the charity was to set up, as we've been advised to do later on, a trading arm, would that trading arm still qualify?
So I think our money is intended to hopefully pay for projects during their construction phase. So if the trading arm was then something after that, then probably not, no. But it doesn't mean that a trading arm, any type of social enterprise is eligible to apply to our fund, but it's more about the stage of your project, because there are people, for example, like Social Investment Scotland and RBS, who are perhaps funding those sorts of businesses, and we think the real gap is actually during this construction phase.
Actually, if I can ask a question from Duncan and Andrew, you obviously refuse some of the applications. What's usually the reason for refusing?
I would probably say it's concern about the ability to repay from cash flow, which is essentially where that repayment profile should come from. So what's the business? What's the what's driving the kind of commercial outcomes at the end of it? And there would be, I think that would be the concern. That in recent cases where the credit panel have been worried about the eventual ability to repay.
And that would be exactly the same thing. I think when the investment managers go through the business plans with whoever comes to us, they'll look at different kinds of variance analysis compared to, okay, so you're going to set up a cafe, you're going to sell X amounts of coffee. What happens if you sell Y? What happens if you sell Z? And they'll do all of that with them. And, I guess the idea is that the organisation thinks through that and, has an idea of what if scenarios. But it would be, the only reason we wouldn't would be because of the organisation being unable to pay.
We have two questions here.
Yeah, I was just going to ask, are you all in direct competition? Would you all be part of the pie chart at the same time?
You could do, yeah.
You could.
Yeah.
I mean, I know you talked about layering up, perhaps they would come in after something you'd helped in development. But in theory, you could, three organisations could be part of the project.
Yeah, but when we were set up, we were capitalised with money from four of the main banks, and RBS was one of those. So we've got a very strong relationship with RBS. So absolutely, most of the money that we loan out is actually part of as I said before, a cocktail fund. So absolutely, we do it together.
So you're not in competition?
No, and some other organisations. So I'm thinking of a recent case where we did a joint deal with Big Issue Invest. And they had a more kind of they had a bigger risk appetite for the money that they were putting in and the basis on which the money was coming in, and we were just putting it in a kind of normal term loan repayment based on normal criteria. So yeah, we've done deals with others as well. So no reason.
So sometimes, the commercial banks might want to see a bit of a spread of the risk. They might not loan for the full amount, and then we'll come in. And often, and I think that you mentioned earlier on, one of you guys mentioned earlier on, that you can sometimes get cheaper forms of finance from the mainstream lenders, and that's great, and we would encourage that if that's possible. But if you're not able to get the full amount, then we'll come at the top up and take take the lesser security, if you like.
Question here?
Yeah, a question about the business plan. Would you want to see, how much help would you give in improving a business plan?
Well, I think from a standpoint of having looked at what you've drafted up, then the answer is there's help available, both internally and there's lots of sources of business planning advice that you can access. But so it's a mix of both, really. So I mean, I think if we were getting a business plan that we didn't think was quite the finished article, we would be able to give immediate advice and sort of feedback and direction. And if it was needing a bit more work, what we've tended to do is maybe involve some of our local people who. So if it was in Aberdeen, for example, we could go to some of the local team there and say, would you give us some help, and maybe go out and work one-to-one to help build it up. So.
It's about funding as much as you need. So if somebody comes to us and they've got a great idea and a great plan, a lot of the time with social entrepreneurs in particular, they've got so much great ideas in their head, but maybe not able to articulate it as well in a business case scenario. We will help them with that, so that we will help them take that idea, turn it into a plan that we can then take to our funding panel to support them. And more recently, we started something called Sys Connects, which is on a Thursday now. Anybody's able to come in, book an hour slot with one of the investment managers, and actually just talk through their plans. No commitment, no they have to take a loan or anything like that afterwards, but just to have a conversation about what it would mean, look at their business plans, throw around some ideas with them. Yeah.
And then lastly for our fund, when it launches actually, the idea is that we will have a grant pot that sits alongside it for that very reason. Because these are complicated construction projects, and because of all of the complex social issues and making sure you've got all of that argument really right, the idea is that organisations can apply to PRT for a grant. You aren't promised fund investment just because you use our grant, but we will spend that money doing our very best to work with you to get your business plans ready, not just for our fund, but for Heritage Rotary and everybody else. Thank you.
It's not really a question to the panel here, but one difficulty we have is that many of the funders don't accept the cost of finance as being an eligible expenditure. So in effect, that part of your budget you have to target other grant funders, and they then pay a disproportionate share of that. It's really a plea that the bodies put pressure on those major funders that don't consider it to be eligible. Because how on earth do we deliver projects without bridging finance or offshore?
Is that grant providers who normally don't?
Yes, they'll say, sorry, that £10,000 for your bridging finance, that's not eligible. So your project cost goes down and they give you a percentage of the remaining balance, and you're left with a funding gap.
Yeah, I think what I'd say to that is I think that's exactly that need is why our three funds are standing here today, because we can help with just that, because I think grant funders, like I said, they want to fund very specific things. So we will continue to make the point, but in the meantime we'll also try and address it.
And we do, we work, I think all of us work more and more closely together with a lot of the grant funders to try align things, especially, you're talking about the impact reporting, and it can be a real bind for organizations. If you've got I keep saying it, a cocktail of funders, and you've got to report your impacts of 4 or 5 different funders, and they're all in different types of templates. There's a lot of crossover there between us all, and I think we're all trying to work a little bit closer to make it as simple as possible for the fundees, if you like. Yeah.
Sorry, you mentioned the possibility, I think, Andrew, of 1 to 5 year periods before making the first repayment.
Yes.
Presumably you'd still be charging interest on the capital, would you?
Yeah, that's right.
There is still a cost to that.
Yeah. And that's new. We've just launched that literally last week, and that was actually with funding from Big Society Capital that we managed to get in. That's enabled us to do that.
Why would you go for your type of financing, which has an interest there and it tops up the last comment, or apply to a leader who could potentially give you a grant, interest free, a grant area, which is no interest and does not need to be repaid, although it has to be the application or use has got to be sustainable, similar. Why would you use use systems, rather than the leader type system. Saying leader could be other.
We're not there to compete with grant funders, and I wouldn't say to somebody, take social investment over a grant. I think we would always say if there's grants available that you can access, and we'll even point you in that direction to go and access them. Our mission, if you like, is connecting capital with communities, and how they do that, the best and the cheapest way for them to do that is fantastic, and they should. What I would say as well, though, is that there's no such thing as free money. There's the time and the effort spent in actually accessing that money. I think in some of the benefits of social investment, it's about the amount that you need when you need it to suit your objectives. So it's not about having to crowbar your plan to somebody else's objectives and getting any mission drift. And it's also the turnaround is very quick, so it's not like you have to wait 6 months or anything else before another leader application or anything opens.
More or less emergency funding.
As emergency funding?
Yes.
No, I wouldn't class it as emergency funding. I mean, some of the feedback that we've had from some of our customers have been that taking on social investment has given them control over their future, because a lot of the time for ours, it's fixed interest rates you're paying back. You know exactly what that's going to be, and you don't have to spend every 2 or 3 years chasing different parts of grant funding. Yes, you can use grant funding to supplement and to keep different projects going and to get new projects off the ground. But if you're taking on especially a substantial amount of loan finance, you know exactly what those payments are going to be, you know exactly what your plans are going to be, because you're going to have come up with the plans to deliver on those kinds of, to deliver on the finances that will enable you to pay it back. And certainly it feels like it gives them more control of the finances and sustainability going forward. I wouldn't call it emergency funding, but I certainly wouldn't say that we're competing with grant funders. We'd say we work in collaboration with them. Don't know what you guys.
I would agree. I mean, I think the majority of projects will have a mix of funding in place, and having some grant funding in place clearly would be a good thing to have. But my experience is that inevitably at some point there'll be some more traditional working capital, whatever you want to call it, that you can blend in. It might even be part of the grant funding award in the first place. It's not isolated, and there might be other aspects in. So I think you've just got an availability of different pots of money that suit the particular project. So it's.
And I think the rise in this sector, social investment, actually reflects the fact that there is less and less money in the grant schemes. So it's inevitable that something like this would have to be considered. Any more questions before our next break? If not, can I? Oh, there's one more.
I feel cheeky asking this. Why are the rates the same rates I can get if I go to the bank and not less? Why can't they be 3 or 4% or 2.5% or a point above? No, I'm serious.
Yeah.
Why?
Well, the reality is that we have to survive as an organisation,
Okay.
and if we have to pay the money back at a percentage to the people who invest in us, and we have to charge more than what we paid back in order to survive and to make the kind of loans that we do. So that differential, if you like, is what keeps us afloat. Otherwise, we would not survive. There would be no social finance.
I understand you. Maybe I'm addressing your words more. Yes.
Oh.
Yeah, it's a fair comment. I mean, I think the pricing varies on each different project, and if you were able to get finance that was on an unsecured basis, you would typically expect to pay more as an interest margin. We believe providing access to funding that wouldn't be available through the main street. So what would have been the alternative? No. Decline. So we're thinking, here's an opportunity to provide the funding, but there might be a price that we think is competitive attached to that. The interest margins might be much higher if it managed to be approved. But I would agree with what Andrew says, that we have a cost of capital as well, and it needs to be built into that. There's a cost of capital that would include things like projecting what bad debts might happen at some point.
Saying that, I went to one of your previous lectures, Andrew, and you were saying that in terms of bad debt, the ratio was far lower for social enterprises, something like 1% or 2%, which is much below what you find in the private sector.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is probably the case, and I think we would reflect that as well. And that probably also reflects the fact that there's probably a much higher degree of risk aversion amongst the people that we're lending money to in the first place. They don't want to see it, go bad, and the experience has been that indeed proves to be the case.
Would you say then that your terms of lending, even though the interest rate itself may be a fairly standard one, are more flexible in terms of payment holidays and other concessions you might make? Would that be true across the board?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, just to touch on that point as well, I think probably the bad debt rates are lower because you guys will work down hard to make sure that money gets back, but it probably takes that bit longer to get back. And so when you factor in those delays and we're perhaps getting interest along the way, versus most of the, but if it does go wrong, it goes wrong and those people, maybe they just hand the keys back to the bank and say your problem.
Yeah.
Typically community organisations don't do that. So your actual, bad debt rates are lower, but it does take longer to get that money.
And because it takes longer, if you factor that in, you find that the interest rate in effect is probably lower.
Probably the same.
Okay.
Okay. Any more? Okay, I think we've just started this whole theme of social investment, so we'll have a chance to discuss more in groups after the break. So let's have 10 minutes, stretch our legs, have tea or coffee, biscuits, and come back.